Guide, I've always wondered, how do ships float when they're made of steel? I mean, if I drop a steel spoon in the water, it sinks right to the bottom. Why doesn't a whole ship do that?
That's a great question to start with. Let's think about that steel spoon first. Why do you think it sinks so quickly?
Because it's heavy? Steel feels really solid and dense, like nothing can push it back up.
Exactly. And that's the key here. Steel is denser than water. That means for the same size piece, steel weighs more than the same amount of water would. When you drop that spoon in, it only pushes aside a tiny bit of water, just enough to cover itself. But the water it pushes away doesn't weigh as much as the spoon does, so the water can't hold it up. Down it goes.
So, it's like the water is trying to lift it, but the spoon is too heavy for the little bit of water it moves?
You've got it. Imagine the water as a bunch of hands trying to support the spoon. But since the spoon is small and heavy, those hands don't have enough strength from the water it displaces. It sinks because its weight beats the push from the water. I remember when I was your age, I tested this with some old nails in a bucket. Every one plunked straight down, no matter how shiny they were.
That makes sense. But ships are made of steel too, right? Like the whole bottom and sides. So why don't they sink just like the spoon or those nails?
That's the puzzle, isn't it? Ships do use a lot of steel, but they're not just a solid lump like a spoon. Think about it this way. If you had a super light balloon filled with air and covered it in a thin layer of steel, would that sink?
Probably not, because the balloon part would make it float, even with the steel on top.
Right. But a ship isn't exactly like that. The steel in a ship is shaped into a big, hollow structure. It doesn't displace just a little water like a spoon. It pushes away a huge amount because of its size and shape. Still, the main reason steel sinks on its own is that density, about 7.8 grams per cubic centimeter for steel, compared to water's 1 gram per cubic centimeter. So a solid steel block always wins the weight battle against the water it moves.
Density. That's like how packed this stuff is, right? So steel is packed tighter than water molecules.
Spot on. Water molecules are looser, so they float things that are less packed. But here's a fun way to see it. Grab a toy car made of metal and try it in a bathtub. It sinks fast because it's small and solid. Now, if you had a bigger version, empty inside, like a cardboard box taped up, wait, not steel, but the idea is the same, it might bob a bit if it's wide enough to push more water.
I tried something like that once with aluminum foil. Crumpled it into a ball and it sank, but made a boat shape, flat and open, it floated, with a little weight in it.
Perfect example. The foil ball displaces little water relative to its weight, just like steel. But the boat's shape spreads out, displacing more. Steel sinks because it's dense and compact. No empty space to help. Ships challenge that, though, being steel but not sinking.
Yeah, it's weird. If steel always sinks like that, how does a ship made of the same stuff manage to stay up?
That's what we'll dig into next. How the ship's design turns that sinking steel into something that floats. What do you think might be the trick?
Maybe the ship is shaped in a special way? Like really wide and flat so it doesn't tip over easily.
That's a smart guess. Shape does play a role, but let's step back a bit and figure out the basic rule for why anything floats or sinks. You mentioned earlier that heavy things sink, like that steel spoon. But is floating really just about being light? Think about a big rock versus a wooden log. The rock's heavy and sinks, but the log floats even though it's not super light.
Yeah, wood floats in my bathtub. But the rock plops right down. So it's not just weight?
Exactly, it's not. There's this cool idea called buoyancy. That's the upward push from the water trying to hold something up. The trick is, an object floats if the water it pushes out of the way weighs more than the object itself. If the displaced water is heavier, it lifts the thing like a hidden hand underneath.
Displaced water? You mean the water that gets moved when I put something in?
Yep. Imagine you're in a pool and you jump in. The water splashes away to make room for you. That water you pushed aside has a certain weight. If your body weighs less than that splash of water, you float. If more, you sink. It's like the water saying, "Hey, I've got this much support to give. Match it or beat it."
Oh, so even heavy stuff could float if it pushes away enough water. Like if it's big enough to shove a ton of water aside?
You've nailed it. This comes from a guy named Archimedes who lived a long time ago in ancient Greece. He figured out what's now called Archimedes' principle. The buoyant force on an object is equal to the weight of the fluid it displaces. Legend has it, he was so excited when he got it that he ran through the streets yelling "Eureka!" without even getting dressed after his bath.
That's funny! So, for my toy boat, when I put it in the tub, it pushes away a bunch of water around its bottom. If that water weighs more than the boat, it stays up.
Right. Let's try a quick thought test. Take a ping pong ball. Super light, displaces a tiny bit of water, but since it's so light, it floats easily. Now, imagine filling it with sand until it's heavy. If you add too much, it displaces the same small amount of water, but now weighs more, so down it goes. But if you make a bigger hollow ball, even with some weight inside, it can displace way more water and float again.
I get it. Like, my sister has this plastic duck that floats no matter what, because it's got air inside and a wide base. The water it moves must be heavier than the whole duck.
Spot on. Heavy things don't always sink if they can spread out to displace more. Remember that objection you might have, that floating is just for light stuff? Nope. Even submarines can float or sink on purpose by changing how much water they let in, adjusting that displacement. It's all about that balance. Weight versus the weight of the water shoved aside.
So, applying this to ships, steel is heavy and dense, like we said. But if the ship is huge, does it push away enough water to match its weight?
That's the heart of it. A solid steel block, even a big one, sinks because its density is so high. It displaces water equal to its volume. But that water weighs way less than the steel. But a ship isn't solid. It's designed to push aside a massive volume of water with its hull dipping in while the rest stays above. The key is making sure the total weight of the ship, steel, cargo, everything, is less than the weight of all that displaced water.
Hull. That's the outer shell, right? Like the skin of the ship that touches the water.
Yes, exactly. Picture a ship as a giant empty tin can, but way bigger and stronger. When it's in the water, only the bottom part dips in, displacing a huge amount, thousands of tons of water sometimes. As long as the ship weighs less than that, buoyancy wins and it floats. I once watched a model ship demo at a science fair. They loaded it with weights until it just barely floated, the waterline rising higher on the hull. Tip it too far, and it starts to sink because it displaces less.
Cool. So no matter how heavy the steel is, if the ship displaces enough water overall, it stays afloat. But what if the steel parts are small and dense? Doesn't that pull it down anyway?
It tries to, but the whole structure works together. The steel provides strength without adding too much weight if it's thin and spread out. Think of it like a bird's bones, hollow to keep light, but strong enough to fly. Ships use that principle on water. Without buoyancy balancing the weight through displacement, nothing would float, light or not.
This makes sense now. But steel ships are so massive. How exactly does their size help them displace just the right amount without being too heavy?
Great observation. Size is a huge part of the magic here. Let's zoom in on that. You know how a tiny steel washer sinks in a glass of water? It's small, so it only nudges aside a few drops, which don't weigh enough to lift it. But scale that up to something as big as a ship, and everything changes. The sheer size means it can push away thousands of gallons of water, creating a buoyant force that's massive enough to counteract all that steel weight.
So bigger size equals more water pushed away? But wait, if I make a steel ball bigger, wouldn't it still sink because it's all solid metal?
That's a common mix-up, and you're right to question it. A solid steel ball, no matter how big, would sink. Its density stays the same, so the water it displaces still weighs less than the steel itself. But ships aren't solid balls. Their size works because the shape is spread out, like a wide, shallow pan, instead of a heavy lump. That flat, broad hull lets the ship cover a lot of surface area on the water, displacing a ton more volume without adding weight proportionally. It's like comparing a pebble to a raft made of pebbles glued together. The raft spreads the weight over a bigger area, so the water supports it better.
I see. Like how a wide surfboard floats better than a narrow one, even if they're the same material. The board pushes more water down to hold you up.
Exactly. Shape and size team up. A ship's hull is designed to be long and wide, dipping just enough to displace water equal to the ship's total weight. Cargo ships, for example, can be over 1,000 feet long. That's like 3 football fields end to end. All that length and width means they shove aside water weighing hundreds of thousands of tons. If the ship were tiny, like a model version, it might sink under its own steel frame. But at full scale, the volume displaced skyrockets. I once built a simple barge out of popsicle sticks for a school project. It was tiny and sank with a few coins. But when my teacher scaled up the design on paper, showing how a real one would float a truck, it clicked.
That's neat. So size spreads out the mass, making the steel less of a burden per bit of water moved. But doesn't a bigger ship weigh way more too? Like all that extra steel and stuff inside?
It does weigh more, sure. A massive tanker might tip the scales at 500,000 tons loaded up. But here's the clever part. The weight increases with size, but the displaced water increases even faster because volume grows quicker than surface area or material used. Think of it like blowing up a balloon. A small one displaces little air, but a huge one pushes away a roomful. For ships, engineers calculate exactly how much hull to submerge so the buoyancy matches. If it's too small, not enough lift. Too big without careful design, and it could be unstable, rocking like a top-heavy toy.
Unstable. Yeah, I've seen videos of big waves making ships tilt. So size helps with stability too.
You bet. A larger ship has a lower center of gravity relative to its base, thanks to that spread-out shape. It displaces water evenly, so it doesn't tip easily. Small boats can flip in rough water because their size limits how much they can push aside without capsizing. But ocean liners? Their enormous size gives them a deep draft, the part below water, that acts like a keel, keeping them steady. Remember that foil boat you made? If you made it longer and wider, it could carry more pennies without sinking, right? Same idea, just on a gigantic scale.
Totally. I added more foil sides to one once, and it held twice as many coins. So for ships, being massive isn't just showy. It's what lets the steel float, instead of dragging everything down.
Precisely. Size turns the tables on density. Without it, steel would always win the sinking game. But even with all that, there's something inside these giants that makes the difference even clearer. Those parts that aren't filled with heavy cargo or machinery.
Inside? Like, what keeps the weight from building up too much in there?
Good question. It's all about those empty spaces you mentioned, filled with air instead of heavy stuff. The hull, that tough outer shell we talked about, is watertight and designed to trap air inside, like a giant sealed bubble made of steel. Without that air, the ship would be way too dense, just like filling your foil boat with rocks until it sinks. But with air keeping things light, the whole ship weighs less than the massive amount of water its hull displaces when floating.
So the air makes the ship lighter overall? But isn't steel still heavy, even if there's air trap?
It is, but think of it this way. Imagine a steel soda can, empty and sealed. On its own, it floats in a pool because the air inside takes up space without adding weight, lowering the average density of the whole thing. The can displaces a bit of water equal to its volume, and since the air makes it way less than that water, up it stays. Now scale that to a ship. The hull creates enormous air pockets like watertight compartments throughout the body. A big cargo ship might have air filling most of its volume, so even with engines and decks of steel, the total density drops below that of water. It's not the steel floating, it's the ship as a whole, buoyed by all that trapped air helping displace even more water than before.
Watertight compartments? Like little rooms inside that don't let water in?
Exactly. Ships are divided into hundreds of these sealed sections, so if one gets damaged, the others stay dry and airy. That air reduces the weight dramatically. For instance, the empty weight of a supertanker without fuel or cargo might be around 20,000 tons, but its hull displaces over 30,000 tons of water when floating lightly. The air in those hull spaces is what tips the scale, making the ship less dense overall. Without it, it'd be like a solid steel iceberg, plunging down no matter the size.
Oh, I get it. So the air isn't just empty, it's actively helping by keeping the density low, so the buoyancy from all that displaced water can lift everything.
You've got the idea. Density is key here. Water's at 1 gram per cubic centimeter, steel's over 7. But mix in a ton of air, which weighs almost nothing, and the ship's average density dips under 1. It's like baking a cake. If you pack it solid with dense batter, it's heavy, but whip in air bubbles, and it rises light and fluffy. Ships are the same. Engineers build them with thin steel walls enclosing huge volumes of air, ensuring the weight stays balanced against the water pushed aside. I recall sailing on a small ferry once. You could feel how buoyant it was, bobbing gently because those air-filled hulls kept it from feeling like a lead weight.
But what if water does get in somehow? Like a hole from a rock or something? Won't it fill up the air spaces and make it sink fast?
That's a real worry, and it's why those compartments are so important. If water leaks into one section, it floods that air pocket, adding weight and reducing buoyancy there. But the other sealed parts keep their air, so the ship might list to one side or sink lower, but not plunge entirely unless many are breached. That's what happened with the Titanic. It hit an iceberg that ripped open several compartments, letting water overwhelm the air traps. Modern ships have double hulls and pumps to fight leaks, sucking out water to preserve the air. Still, the principle holds. As long as enough air stays trapped, the density remains low enough for the displaced water to support it.
Double holes? Like an extra layer of steel to protect the air inside?
Yep, an inner and outer skin, with space between for even more air or foam that absorbs impacts. It makes leaks less likely to reach the main air spaces. And in everyday sailing, this setup lets ships carry heavy loads, oil, cars, grain, without sinking, because the cargo goes into specific holds that don't flood the whole hull. A fully loaded container ship might displace 200,000 tons of water, with the air in the hull ensuring the total weight stays under that. Without those air-filled designs, no amount of size would help. It'd be back to sinking like your steel spoon.
So in real life, captains and builders count on this air to keep everything stable, even in storms or with full cargo?
Absolutely. They check the waterline daily, how deep the hull sits, to make sure it's displacing just the right amount. Load too much without adjusting, and the air's buoyancy can't keep up. The ship rides lower, but still floats thanks to the hull's shape trapping that vital air. It's a perfect balance of engineering and physics, turning what should sink into something that glides across oceans reliably.
Wow, it all connects now. The density of steel, the size, the shape, and especially this air in the hull making the whole thing light enough to float. I won't look at ships the same way again. They're like giant, clever bubbles wrapped in strength.
I'm glad it clicked for you. You've really grasped how ships defy that sinking steel by smart design, trapping air to beat density and let buoyancy take over. It's one of nature's coolest tricks, scaled up for the seas.